Hi, I'm John Iredale, Pro Vice-Chancellor for Health and Life Sciences here at the University of Bristol. Welcome to another edition of our digital Fireside Chats. Today, we mark another milestone. Those of you who've seen the previous one will remember that at the onset of the vaccine campaign, Adam Finn and I had a long discussion about its potential. Well, we've reached the stage now where the vaccination rate in the UK has passed the remarkable figure of 15 million, all in 69 days. Truly a massive and extraordinary undertaking. So I'm delighted to welcome back Adam to discuss this progress and to talk about the challenges and opportunities ahead. This was billed as a reunion because Adam was here, but actually that's only partly true. Because we're welcoming someone new to these podcasts, and that's Stephan Lewandowsky, who is a professor in the School of Psychology. And Steve is an expert on misinformation and the attributes of data and information that are used on the internet and in other media that might make people vaccine hesitant, or even make them refuse a vaccine. And this has been a major thrust of Steve's work lately. So we will be discussing with Steve some of those attributes and what we can all do to address them. So welcome, both of you.
Nice to be with you again, John.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
Great. So I'm gonna kick off with Adam. So we've passed this remarkable milestone. Do you think we'll hit in the predicted time the target vaccination for the whole population?
A good question, John. I mean, the fact that it's gone so well so far is certainly encouraging, but while the show is on the road, it's far from done. And so we need to see how that will go. I mean, there were three things that needed to come together. We needed a supply of vaccine, we needed a delivery mechanism that worked efficiently, and we needed people to show up to be immunized, and that all of those three things, up to 15 million, have happened pretty much on cue. So that's great. But we've now got to essentially do what we've done already all over again by giving those same people their second doses, or at least nearly all of them, and at the same time expand it out into younger people down to the age of 50, a much larger group of people with comorbidities, and then on into the population. So yeah, maybe let's hope it goes as well as it has already.
And those comorbidities would be things like chronic illnesses, transplants, that sort of thing, would they?
Yeah, they're basically anything that the various epidemiological studies that have been done have showed us are predictors of hospitalization or death from COVID. So that includes a wide range of conditions, cardiovascular disorders, immunological disorders, respiratory disease, and so on. So really quite large numbers of people in the sort of 16 to 50 age group coming through now.
Right. Now, there's obviously been quite a lot in the media about decisions being made elsewhere. Different countries in Europe have adopted different interpretations of the guidance from the European Medicines Agency. And we've seen the WHO endorse the UK strategy of a 12-week delay between dose 1 and dose 2 of the 2-dose vaccines. But one of the decisions that sparked a lot of debate has been the one that some of the European countries are not recommending the Oxford vaccine for the over 65s. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the dose recommendation from WHO was specifically around the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, where there is really very strong evidence that a wider dose interval gives you a bigger booster response, and there's sustained protection in between the two doses. Several European countries have basically hesitated to implement the vaccine over the age of 65, simply because there are relatively few people in the studies that have come through and actually got sick and shown the effectiveness in that age group. It's interesting in a way to contrast that with the recommendations around the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, for which there is also no evidence, but above the age of around 75. I mean, they have got some people between 65 and 75, but really no evidence in those older age groups. But at the same time, the vaccines are being used in older people in their 80s. So there's a sort of inconsistency there. We certainly have taken the view that you can and should extrapolate, and we need to target these vaccines in the highest risk groups, and that is the elderly people. And I think that will come through and prove to be the right decision to have made. And of course, we're about to get effectiveness data from a number of different studies, which I think will be made public before the end of this month, and which are all, I can tell you, pointing in the right direction so far.
Well, that's really gratifying to know. And I was going to make the point, but you've made it more effectively than I think I would have done, that this constant monitoring and evaluation of the process as the vaccine rolls out will, of course, mean that we have updated information on which we can make judgments in respect of the way in which the vaccines are deployed in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone needs to expect that. It's not like we're going to be able to make a plan and stick to it. We are going to have to make adjustments in the context of how we observe these vaccines working, whether they impact on transmission, whether one vaccine is better than another in a particular context, and above all, what happens as new variants of the virus begin to circulate. So yeah, there's still plenty to do, and we still need to gather evidence in order to work out how to do it.
Well, you've cheekily given me the segue into my next and final question, which is, how worried should we be about the so-called South African variant?
Well, there's a particular mutation which has been identified in that variant, also in one of the two from Brazil, and actually in some of the samples from the B117 UK variant. It's called E484K, and it's in the receptor binding domain of the S protein, and it does seem to reduce the ability of vaccine and infection-induced sera to neutralize the virus. And we've now got some evidence from South Africa for 3 of the different vaccines of reduced efficacy against that particular variant in that context. So I think that tells us that we're going to see this virus evolving. Up till now, the variant we've got now has really been evolving in the context of improved infectiousness in the human population. But now, as immunity in the population grows, the selection pressure on the virus to evade that immunity will grow too. So I would predict that we're almost certainly going to see reformulations of vaccines as time goes forward, and a need to adjust them in order to maximize effectiveness. But nevertheless, we're starting from a point where these vaccines are really, really effective, luckily. So even if we lose some effectiveness over time, they're still really valuable. And by driving down the virus circulation, we of course reduce its opportunities to evolve. So every reason to surge forward with the vaccines we've got now, but also lots of reasons to keep an eye open and see if we need to adjust our efforts as we go along.
Okay, thanks very much, Adam. I hope you can stay and feel free to interject where relevant, because I'd like to open up the discussion with Steve. So once again, Steve, welcome. I see that behind you, you've got your co-education handbook logo or front cover with the web address on the URL. So you worked on this handbook that was aimed to help people effectively debunk harmful conspiracy theories. So what is it about these theories that are a real hook for people? Do they fill a psychological need?
Yeah, they do. And first of all, I should point out that Adam and I both collaborated on this handbook, and he's also a lead author on it. And the handbook actually covers a whole range of things, including an affirmative case for vaccinations generally, because one of the things we shouldn't forget is that the vast majority of people is waiting for the vaccine, very keen to take it. And we need to communicate to those people the success of vaccination. So that's the first thing we have to do. Now, you're absolutely right. There are some people who go into deep down the rabbit hole, some of them, into conspiracy theories, which is something that we observe with every pandemic and with every scary and frightening event, whatever it may be. In the United States, a school shooting or a mass shooting is going to trigger conspiracy theories like that, because what happens in those situations is that people have a sense that they've lost control over their lives. And of course, in a sense, we have. We're sitting at home, not being able to do the things we'd rather do, most of us. And that loss of control for some people is a need or a trigger to go into conspiracy theories, because if you can blame these conspirators for terrible things happening, for some people that is psychologically more comforting than to accept the fact that we're faced with a random event we can't control. So that is where it is coming from.
Are there particular signs you can look for that lead you to be concerned someone might be susceptible to these conspiracy theories, and are there practical steps that we can take?
Yes, I mean, the starting at the back with the practical steps, one of the important things is to educate the public about the rhetorical techniques that conspiracy theorists are using to mislead the public. And this approach is called inoculation, and it is like a medical inoculation, but it's a cognitive inoculation. You tell people something about the techniques by which they will be misled. And there's a lot of evidence now suggesting that once we teach people that in brief videos of less than 2 minutes, for example, they then become more resistant to being misled. So, for example, one aspect of conspiracy theories is that they're incoherent, and that people hold mutually exclusive beliefs at the same time. For example, the belief that COVID is a hoax and that it is a chemical weapon developed by China. Well, it can't be both. It's either one or the other. And of course, it's neither in this case. But the point is that people sometimes hold these contradictory beliefs. And knowing that as a member of the public is very helpful, because if somebody shows up and contradicts themselves, then you know immediately, maybe this person is into conspiracy theories.
That's a great steer, Steve. So if, as one might imagine in these, I mean, you've described the tension people feel under, they're afraid. If within a family or a friendship group, you have an individual that gets particularly hooked on a conspiracy theory or a conspiracy website, are there any tips you have to maintaining relationships and maintaining positivity and the opportunity, I guess, also, of course, to steer that individual away from what we would consider to be really quite bizarre concepts, beliefs?
Well, first of all, the important thing to recognize is that there's a whole spectrum out there of belief in conspiracy theories and misinformation. And if you look at the data, then, a lot of people who are articulating conspiracy theories do so to get off the hook. It's easy to say climate change is a hoax, and then I can buy myself a huge, big 4-wheel drive, or I can fly to Bali on holiday because, I've dealt with that nasty problem. So those people one can talk to. That's what the data show. It is possible to debunk conspiracies and for them to change their minds. Now, having said that, there is, however, a separate group of people that one might want to call hardcore believers in conspiracy theories, who are not easily reached by argument. Quite on the contrary, these are people who will take any argumentation and flip it around to confirm their conspiracy theory. So if I try to tell them something about scientific evidence, their response is simply going to be, you're in on the conspiracy as well. You're trying to make us believe what the government is doing to invent the world government or something. They always have a reason for this. Now, if there's a person like that among your friends and family, then I'm afraid you're confronted with a problem. And there isn't a silver bullet that I or anybody else can offer. And we know from slightly different contexts, such as this QAnon conspiracy theory going around the world at the moment, mainly in the US, we know there that it rips apart families in the same way that cults do, in the same way that extremism does. And there's a very strong psychological similarity between extremists and cult members and believers, strong believers in conspiracy theories. And they're unfortunately very difficult to reach.
Right. On the other hand, of course, there are a group, if we use vaccination as an example, of the vaccine hesitant who, for entirely understandable reasons, have concerns, but who now, it would seem rather concerningly, are either being targeted or are within communities in which some of these ideas are being circulated. So how can we, and obviously I'm thinking about those, for instance, who might be at particular risk of COVID, like those from a BAME background, for whom there's evidence of some of these ideas circulating, particularly on social media. So what can we do as a society to address that and to support those individuals?
Yeah, very good point, especially BAME communities. Well, it turns out Bristol is actually doing a lot when it comes to engaging with those communities with community appropriate messengers. This is one of the things that we find wherever we look with vaccinations, but also other public health issues, that if you want to reach people, you have to ensure that there is a match of the culture between the recipient and the messenger. So I would not be a particularly good person to speak to BAME communities because I belong to a different culture, whether I like it or not. However, having messengers who are part of that community can be very effective. And the Bristol City Council, in collaboration with the NHS, the local NHS, is organizing webinars that are addressed at BAME communities with communicators from those communities, and they have been shown to be quite successful. And in fact, our wiki that's underlying our handbook is reporting these instances. We even have videos up there of the event itself. And generally, we find that those communities can be reached through role models from the same communities.
Okay. Finally, and I feel that this is a slightly cheeky question to ask, because I think the subject must be so huge, so enormous, so broad. What is the balance of evidence in terms of the generation and propagation of conspiracy theories, that it's a feature of, if you will, the internet and associated tech, as opposed to alternative means of human communication?
Well, it's a great question, and I just changed my background into a different billboard, which has the link to another report I produced recently for the European Commission, where we looked at precisely that issue. What's the relationship between technology and democracy? And just briefly, there are a couple of things about social media and the internet that are qualitatively different from previous means of communication. Let me just give you one example. If you were a village idiot in the 19th century in Gloucestershire and you thought the earth was flat, now you would have never met anybody else who shared that belief. And everybody in the village would have known, yeah, okay, this is little Jimmy or whatever. He's kind of a little soft in the head. And that was it. Now, today, that same person can go online and they will find a community of like-minded people on Facebook. And one of the things we know from decades of research in cognitive science is that the extent to which you find a belief supported in people around you determines how strongly you hold it. And now we have created a situation online where any belief, no matter how absurd, will find a community of like-minded people. And the moment you have that epistemic community, it becomes much, much harder to change people's mind, because they have an in-group now, they have mutual support, they think everybody shares their opinion. And these are known as false consensus effects. And we know that they make it much harder to deal with misinformation. So that is something that could have never happened without a global online community. So that's just one instance of many where we find that the technology has created a situation that our societies just weren't prepared to handle. And we now have to figure out ways of dealing with that.
Right, that sounds like a further lifetime's work, Steve.
Tell me about it. Yes, I'm on to it.
Well, listen, that's been a fantastic discussion. I've hugely enjoyed hearing from both of you, and just, personally and on behalf of anyone else who wants to listen to this, could I thank you both very much for a really fascinating and hugely informative discussion.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, John.
Right.
Nice to meet you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.